Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Colie. Today I'm speaking with Jennifer Ginty. Jennifer had a traumatic childhood. Through that, developed complex PTSD. Through her journey of finding coping skills, she developed a therapeutic doll to help children better cope with their frustrations. Welcome, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Nicole. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Same. And thank you so much for being here, especially talking about something like complex PTSD. But first, I always ask an icebreaker question, and this is the one that I created for you. What does it mean to feel safe?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Uh, Being someone who is hyper vigilant, that's a part of my symptoms of my complex PTSD. I think it's being around people I trust and believe are there to help me through difficult moments in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. Will you tell us a little bit about your background and your childhood?
Absolutely. So I am a single mom. I have two sons, and they're pretty much grown, which is crazy to me. But I live with complex PTSD and major depressive disorder from childhood trauma. Um, all the way up until 14, I lived with my abuser, who was my father. My older brother went to a trusted adult and told them what was happening in our family. And so at 14, my abuser left home. And a lot of people will think that that's where the abuse ends, where the trauma ends.
Right.
But there's so much more that goes along with it. The trauma of going into the court system was something that was really difficult for me. They wanted to press criminal charges against my abuser. But instead of feeling safe with them, that was a great question. I felt very unsafe because they didn't really treat us as if we were the people who were harmed.
Ooh.
Yeah, they wanted to, they just pushed and pushed and gave the benefit of the doubt to my abuser at times, even though my mother would be very adamant about speaking up for us. There were times where, so my older brothers were better able to talk about the abuse that they had gone through, and it took me a little while to open up with it. So when I did finally open up about it, the DA's office was like, she's just saying that because she wants attention.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, victim shaming.
Yes, absolute victim shaming to the point where they made me go in front of a jury, a grand jury, to
Oh,
talk
scary.
about to talk about very intimate situations of sexual abuse that I had endured.
Yeah.
So going into that, hoping that would be a hero to us, we felt as though we were being victimized all over again.
Yeah.
And going through all of that court stuff and finally getting to the end of it, where my abuser, after we went through over 4 to 5 years of trying to put him in prison, he only got 4 years in prison.
Oh, wow.
And he
Wow.
went, yeah, yeah, and he went on to abuse more children.
Mm.
So, yeah, so there's these other traumas that develop.
Yeah.
It doesn't just stop at the childhood abuse, it builds. And one of the things that I did, and I always told myself it was to protect myself, was I would push off the trauma. I would push off the healing journey. And I would say, not yet. I'm in college now. Not yet. I just started a career. Not yet. I have children now.
Yeah.
And so I would push it off and push it off because I was wanting to be the best I could possibly be for everyone else and kind of just let myself just fall back inside of me so
Yeah.
that I could focus on other things, hoping that that would be okay. I would be okay that way. But eventually, my brain told me, right now, you have to start this journey now. And that was really scary.
Yeah. For people who
And
don't know, what is complex PTSD? We hear about PTSD, but we don't hear a lot about complex.
yes, so this is how a social worker had introduced me to the concept. So for PTSD, let's say that you were in a really bad car accident and somebody got hurt, you got hurt, something really, really awful happened. And after that, you would get triggered about getting into a car, getting behind the wheel. And that can last for quite a bit of time for you, but eventually you're going to be able to work your way back into getting into a car, driving that car, not feeling so stressed while you're in that situation. With complex PTSD, you're steeped in your trauma. So you spend very, very long periods of time in traumatic events. And that can be child abuse, domestic violence, even homelessness, and of course, vets who have been in wars. So these are just a few of the ways that people can have long-term trauma. So when you have this kind of trauma that's constantly going, it changes your body. It changes your body chemistry. It changes the neurons in your brain so that you are, like as I said, I'm hypervigilant, especially at night. So you live this trauma, not the trauma that happened, but you live the body changes that were created by this trauma. So complex PTSD is something that is hard for some people to wrap their brains around, because I've had so many people say, well, just don't think about it and just don't talk
Wow.
about it. Right? Right.
That
But
doesn't work.
no, that does not work at all, especially for someone who is literally their body is trauma. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps Score.
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
need to read that book because that speaks to what my experience was. My trauma started to manifest itself in physical ways because,
Okay.
like you were saying, people would say, just don't think about it, don't talk about it. So I would shove it down, and then it would manifest in physical health ailments.
Absolutely.
Hmm, hmm.
Because your body has changed in that sense, having been through that trauma.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so that's pretty much an overview of complex PTSD. It is not recognized in the DSM. But it is very much recognized with professionals, mental health professionals. And there is
Wonderful.
a hope. Yeah, there is a hope that they will actually add that the next time they, work through the DSM.
Yes.
Definitely.
So for you, how did you get to a point where you were able to be identified with it or identify it yourself of having complex PTSD? Can you kind of take us through maybe what life was like for you? Because I know for me, I was immersing myself into habits that were coping mechanisms, but at the time I didn't think so. You know what I mean? You don't think
Mhm.
so when you're living it. So talk about what was going on for you after, you were all done with the trial and just trying to get your life in back to normal after testifying.
Yeah, it's literally the pushing it away, pushing it all away, pushing it down, staying away from the topic. And, I really wish that I had started that earlier, especially before I had children,
Hmm.
because having my boys it was a most wonderful thing for me, but a most difficult, anxious, stressful way of dealing with parenthood, because I didn't have models.
Hmm. Hmm.
I didn't know how to appropriately parent because there wasn't a parent that appropriately, you know, was my parent.
Yeah.
So it was definitely hard because my youngest, I'm sorry, my oldest, he had a lot of behavioral problems, and when he was a baby, he had a lot of physical issues and colic and stomach issues, and he barely slept. And he was also behaviorally, he could be violent,
Mm.
and it was very triggering for me. I thought, is my child abusing me?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
Right? Because that is what I've known of relationships. My husband at the time, he was great. He was such a great husband and father, but it didn't stop me from internalizing and, you know, thinking constantly that I'm not doing the right job. I'm not helping my child. And later on down the road, when he was 4, he was diagnosed with Asperger's.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the time people would be saying to me, that's just him being a boy. He's a boy. He's like, that's what they're like. And I was like, well, if that's what boys are like, I don't think I can do this, you
Right,
know?
right.
So there was a lot of me needing to learn to trust myself, my intuition. I believe that people who have complex PTSD have a really hard time with intuition because when you trusted it when you were in the abusive situation, it didn't matter if you trusted your intuition or not. Your abuser will do whatever they want to do.
Mhm.
They'll go off even when you think that you're doing the very best to not have them go off. So intuition wasn't really the thing that I held on to. I had to let go of that because I would never know what was going to happen.
Right.
So as a mother, I needed to train myself to trust myself being the mother that my child needed. And
Mhm.
it was a hard road, but I slowly was able to do that. I was able to say to myself, you know what your child needs. You know what he he wants as a mother. He's acting and reacting this way because he needs you to love him
Yeah.
and give him that unconditional love that mothers give. And I myself don't feel like I had unconditional love as a child. So I had to teach myself what unconditional love was too, right?
I was just gonna say, yeah, did you have a good representation of unconditional love? Because when we're abused, a lot of times we are not hugged, held. We are not, there's not a lot of positive interaction that goes. So when you have your own children, it's hard to know what's appropriate and what does that love and unconditional love look like. So talk about that a little bit on how you were working through that and like things you noticed where maybe you weren't giving the unconditional love and how you worked through that.
Yeah, I'm not so sure if I have like specific, stories or anything like that, but I had to pull myself away from that feeling of being a victim.
Mm.
So my son, he was little. He had no idea that his explosive behavior was triggering his mom, who was abused as a child herself. I had to teach myself that this little human being is like a caveman,
Yeah,
right? They
really are.
never learned, right? They came out, they didn't know what they needed to do. They just knew the basics. I need to eat, I need to poop, I need,
Yeah.
and I need to stay safe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I always used to call both of my boys my little cavemen because I realized that the only way they're going to learn is if I can teach them. And the only way I can teach them is if I can learn as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So teaching myself that love, unconditional love for myself, had to be the first jumping off point because there's no way I can really teach that to my children if I don't do it myself. I
Yeah.
mean, I could talk the talk, people can talk the talk about how you're supposed to love yourself unconditionally, but I actually had to learn to do that. And I think by giving myself the chance to love myself unconditionally, that's when the intuition really came in, when I was able to know this is the correct way to parent my children.
Yeah. Awesome. So, talk about how that inspired you to create dolls for kids with frustrations.
Yes. So one day I was in a therapeutic group and I was really frustrated with my own symptoms. And I said to the group, I was like, I wish I had a monster that I could just rip apart, throw across the room, bang against the wall. And people in the group were like, yeah. You should have that. So yeah. So I was like, okay. So driving home and I'm like, I need my own monster. How am I going to get my own monster? And I'm not a seamstress. I'm not a tailor. I mean, I had a sewing machine that I tried to make quilts at one point. But, I put together this plush monster. And the monster has Velcro arms, legs, and head so that
Oh,
I actually could rip them apart.
yes.
Yeah. So I named my first monster PTSD Pete for me. So I started using Pete and really started getting into this feeling of, wow, this is so much safer to get out these frustrations than sitting there and letting them grow and letting them take over.
Mhm.
And so I thought, if this can help me, then maybe this can help others, and especially children, because children don't have the knowledge, they don't have the vocabulary of emotions.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but especially in my generation, I feel like we were always told to not show our feelings, not talk about them.
Up. Suck it up.
Right.
Mhm.
Don't be an angry girl. Don't upset your grandmother with your sadness. Don't make people uncomfortable with your emotions. And in order for our children to grow emotionally into like emotionally intelligent adults, they need to be able to have coping skills. They need to be able to feel safe showing all of their emotions, whether they be positive or more difficult emotions, because all emotions are valid. It's
Mhm.
just how we learn to cope with them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to the SBA, and this was 2020, January 2020, right before COVID hit.
Oh,
Went
wow.
to the Yeah, I went to the SBA, and she's like, you really should get in touch with, and we have a entrepreneurial nonprofit in our area. So they do accelerated programs, and I signed up to, interview for the accelerated program for the summer, and I got in, and it was great because everybody was in lockdown. I had all the time in the world to get online with the cohort and figure all the stuff out that we needed to figure out ourselves as entrepreneurs. And that's where I developed My Moody Monster. So Pete became Moody.
Ah.
Yeah, and I've been 4 years in the development, and it took a long time to get through prototyping to find the stickiest Velcro I could find, the softest doll I could make, and did some testing with parents and with teachers and therapists. And Moody's been really great helping the communication open up when talking about emotions and difficult feelings that we all have. Moody's been great for parents to be able to help their children to have that safe space to get out that emotion. But the best part about getting Moody is putting them back together again after you've ripped them apart. Because then you can sit down with a child and say, what happened? What can we do next time to, better cope with this frustration that you have? So really the ripping apart is great, but it's jumping off point for parents and caregivers to talk with kids about their emotions and how they can cope with them.
Yes, I don't think we give kids enough credit that after they're done with the frustration, they can kind of critically think about what put them there and help we can help them work it out through communicating instead of getting so frustrated ourselves. Because we always want to put kids in a box. Just behave. Do what you're told. Do as I say, not as I do. And all those little things that we learned growing up. Just conform, just listen, just be quiet when you're supposed to be quiet. Adults talk, kids listen, all that stuff. And it's just not realistic. We kids feel intense emotion and sometimes they don't know how to outlet it, especially kids with autism.
Yes, yes, definitely. I've had quite a few autistic kids play with Moody, and they love Moody in the sense that they do believe it's a buddy that can help them because they're nonverbal.
Mm.
Many autistic children are nonverbal, so it helps them to show their parents, I need Moody. I'm doing this with Moody. and please understand where I'm at. Also, Moody's great with, tactile, the sound of the ripping of the Velcro. A lot of autistic kids really love that part. Feel of Moody, the sounds that they make, that kind of thing. So, yeah. And then I think a lot of kids, when they have these behavioral problems, they'll have a big upset and then they'll have a shame spiral after.
Mm.
And that's something we really need to try to avoid with our kids. My oldest, again, he would go into a shame spiral after he would have a big blow up. He'd throw things, he'd bite, kick, and then afterwards he'd feel like he was a bad boy.
Oh.
He was never a bad boy. It was just he did not understand how he needed to cope with those big frustrations that he was having. So I wish I had a Moody or something like a Moody when he was young. I
Yeah.
think it would have helped him to have less toxic shame.
Yeah. Wow. So is your son verbal?
Yes, yes, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So he went through like 6 years with the diagnosis, and then he ended up getting re-diagnosed. He has severe ADHD, but they
mhm.
said he's not autistic.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So it was interesting. I am grateful for the autism diagnosis because we got him a lot of great behavioral therapies for it.
yeah.
But yeah, after like 6 years, they were like, well, we had a new neuropsych doctor, and they were like, I don't think he's actually autistic.
Mm,
He has a lot of depression. He has major depressive disorder, like I do.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And and they're discovering that through our cells and our organs, our kids can feel some of our emotions that we bury. And we don't talk a lot about that because it's so new, but that could be a link to his depression.
yes, and generational trauma is a real thing, and I've worked my entire children's lives to break that generational trauma. And I think I have. I'm pretty proud of myself in the sense that I feel as though they feel loved. They feel like I'm behind them 100%.
Yeah.
That I think is so important. Like you said, many children in trauma, they don't get hugs, they don't get kisses, that kind of thing, or even told that they're loved. And that is what I experienced as a child. I don't think I hugged until maybe high school.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't think I physically touched people until then. And, I tell my children every day that I love them. When they leave the house, I say, please be safe. I love you. Because I think that that's important. It's important for our children to understand that we're behind them.
Yeah.
So breaking that generational curse, I will say, has been a triumph.
Yeah, and I think you're doing a great job and you're giving it to the community through Moody, which I think is great. And I think it's something that we need because sometimes yeah, you just want to just tear the stuffing out of something.
Exactly. Yep.
Because the anger is one of the biggest to me, I think it's one of the biggest side effects of being abused is a lot of those stuff down hurts turn into major anger.
Yeah.
And you need a way to outlet that anger.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
No, I was just gonna say, for somebody who's been through things, how can they identify inside of themselves if they might have a major depression or a complex PTSD and they just don't realize?
I highly recommend reaching out to your PCP to discuss how you're feeling, what is triggering you, that kind of thing. Because I think if you love your PCP and respect their diagnoses, that kind of thing, you're going to respect that they will point you in the right direction for who to talk to.
Mhm.
Therapy, I've been in therapy since I was 14 years old. I've had so many different kinds of therapies, but it took my current therapist to really feel safe in talking about my trauma. And
Mm.
it's interesting because I mean, I think I met her about 6 years ago, and she's younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And me being, I'm turning 50 next month, I was like, can a younger therapist truly help me in this? Do they really understand? Right?
Yeah.
But she's amazing. And I think the best reason to see a younger therapist is because they've learned so many new modalities, different therapies that are new to the community, specifically towards diagnoses like PTSD. You
Mm-hmm.
know, before I met my therapist, I had no idea what internal family systems is, which is a fantastic way of, you know, looking inside yourself and talking to the parts of you that are hurt, that are trying to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, she's been doing EMDR with me, which is a whole other modality that focuses on changing brain waves, changing neurons in your system so that I can be less hyper focused and hyper vigilant in my regular everyday life.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important to find the right therapist that you click with and you trust.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I completely agree because for me, coming up for therapy, a lot of the therapists that I would see would be ones that only knew the book. So they had not experienced anything that like I had been through. And so a lot of times that was a block. And I would be like, "You haven't experienced it, asshole." What
Yeah.
are
Oh,
you
yeah.
gonna tell me? You're not.
Absolutely.
And so it's very important to connect with the right therapist and to get into therapy is I think even if you think you don't need therapy, go to therapy.
Yeah.
I
You
really
know, I tell people this all the time. I wish that our system, the US mental or healthcare system required, not so much required, but gave people as part of their healthcare to visit a therapist at least once, like every 3 months, every quarter.
yes.
To not so much require it, but give them the opportunity to meet with a therapist, even if it's once every 3 months, to talk about what's going on so that you can better understand yourself. So I
Absolutely.
think
I
I
think that
think that's
would
really
clear up a lot.
important.
Yeah, I think that would help a lot because there's a lot of people too who've been through very traumatic experiences who don't recall the events. So they
Mhm.
just are walking around thinking everything's fine, but in reality they have experienced something that they've blocked.
Yeah, and then they get triggered and don't know why.
Yeah.
And how scary is that?
So scary. So scary. Do you know that there were so many times as an abused child that I would sit and worry that that was going to happen to me like did I harbor something? Did I put something away that I don't know and is it going to come back and get me? Cuz that was a big thing of flashbacks and just things that they would talk about and you could piece together as somebody who was struggling but looking for some help and it was terrifying to hear some of that stuff because then you start to worry that all of a sudden you're going to have a breakdown and you don't even know why.
Right, right,
Mhm. Did you
right.
experience
Why?
that kind of fear as well as you were going through life?
Yeah, there are points in my life that, I would have major panic attacks and not really understand why. Like in
Mm.
my career, I think my very first like humongous panic attack, the kind that people think they're having a heart attack, came while I was working at my first job, first position. And I called my husband and literally said, I think I'm having a heart attack. He's like, well, why did you call me? Call 911. He's like, if you're having a heart attack, what are you doing? So, but actually talking to him that made me settle down a little bit and, realize, no, my heart is going a million miles an hour because I've been triggered by something.
Yeah.
And I have to remember this experience and how it happened. And I still was not working through my healing journey. This was all still being pushed away. I didn't start this journey until I was in my 40s.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you were just moving through life, trying to
yeah,
ignore it.
yeah.
Wow. And so in the fact that you found healing, do you regret waiting so long, or are you glad that you waited?
No, I regret it. I do regret it. I would absolutely tell anyone who is younger and who is considering motherhood or fatherhood, that kind of thing, to definitely take some time, talk with a therapist, even if you don't feel you have a story. But
Mhm.
if you are experiencing triggers and fears, anxiety, and stress on a level that doesn't seem appropriate, I highly recommend talking to a therapist and finding what modalities you may need to be able to help you to better cope.
Yeah. I like the way you said that, that it's doesn't seem appropriate to the situation. If you're having all these fears and anxieties because yeah, I've had times where I've had a major panic attack for what I felt was like no reason. And
Mhm,
it took a lot to go, wait a minute, this has got to be something that I'm harboring within myself.
mhm. Yeah.
Wow. That
And
is
and
powerful.
yeah, and a lot of us, uh, I work with DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and I created my YouTube channel around DBT because there are a lot of coping skills that they teach. One of the skills that I truly use on a regular basis is checking the facts,
Mm,
making sure that what I'm feeling is the intensity or the actual feeling, the emotion that I should be feeling in the moment. Because when I was young, I was taught that I can't show fear.
mhm,
Fear was like an elixir to my abuser. Enjoyed it. So by not showing fear, I would have to jump to a secondary emotion, and that
mhm,
most of the time was anger. So I started living my emotional development as don't show fear, don't ever show fear, never ever show fear, but you can show anger because it felt more in control. It felt safer to feel anger. So as I go through life and I get into situations where I was scared of something and immediately jumped to anger and started getting angry and yelling, like even just being cut off by someone in traffic.
yeah.
Maybe it scared you because they did it right away and you were so afraid that you were going to hit them. That's fear, the appropriate emotion. But I would immediately turn to anger and start yelling and being upset in that sense because it was safer to me,
Yes.
right?
Yes. I think that a lot of people, and maybe I don't hope not to step on anyone's toes, but I think a lot of people diagnosed with bipolar really could look at, are you harboring anger and you weren't allowed to show fear or something like that? So it outlets as anger and it appears to be bipolar, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense. But that, what you just said, it speaks to a lot of behavior I've witnessed from people who are in a situation that's startling and they go automatically to yelling, screaming, and showing this intense, angry side.
Yeah, because it for me at least, and I know others who have felt this way, it's a, a more controllable emotion than
Mhm,
fear.
mhm.
You
Absolutely.
know,
Fear, I guess, could be in some people's mindset as a show of weakness, whereas
Mhm.
anger is a show of power.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Wow. So talk about DBT and what you're doing to help people with.
Yes. So DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. It was created by a woman named Marsha Linehan, and she created it for people with PTSD and borderline personality disorder because they both have very similar symptoms.
Mm.
So they have like there's 4 tenets of DBT. It's mindfulness, interpersonal communication, distress tolerance, and emotion regulation. And inside these 4, categories, she put together a bunch of coping skills for each one. And DBT is centered around emotions. So what I did on my on YouTube, it's on my website as well, is that I created Moody Talks while I was busy doing the prototyping and testing for Moody. And I would pick an emotion each month. The first week, I go through what are the words that describe this emotion that you're feeling? What are the words that you use? And what are the intensity of these words? So if we were to say fear, scared might be a lower intensity than, I I don't know, like much more. I can't even think of a word that's so highly intensive, you know? And when you learn the words that you use for your emotion, you're better able to understand where you're at in that intensity level that you're feeling. And then the next 3 weeks, I go through a coping skill each week of what you can do to cope with the intense feelings of the emotion.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And who's your target audience? Like, who are you targeting?
So for the Moody Talks, I'm definitely targeting adults.
Mhm.
These are concepts that I hope that I'll be able to start to create more of a children's DBT toolbox. But these skills are more along the lines of adolescents learn them, and adults learn them. So those are definitely targeted towards that age range. It's targeted towards adults who have not had the experience of being able to cope with
Yeah.
their symptoms. And I think that's a lot of people in this world. Again, we don't want to show weakness by showing our emotions. We don't look at mental health as an important aspect of our overall health.
Yeah, and to me, it's the most important. Like, if you don't have your mental health, how can you have your regular health?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I also do Moody story time. So Moody and I read a book each week about emotions, big emotions, big feelings, and so that's on the YouTube channel as well, and that's what's directed towards the kiddos. But yeah, Moody Talks really actually helped me so much with my healing because I was doing this each month and talking about these emotions that can be so difficult. And it was actually reiterating the coping skills that work for me and reminding me that I have this toolbox that really helps me through my days.
Yeah, I think a lot with coaches and people who are inspired to help others through their pain. It is kind of like a healing therapy for us as well as we're helping others find their healing.
Yes.
That's awesome. So, what do you have planned for the future? What does the future hold for Moody and for you?
So I just sold out of my first batch of Moody's, so I'm really excited.
Awesome.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I'm in the process of fundraising to get a very large batch of my Moody's, and I'm so excited to get them out into the world. My social mission is that I want to give of each order that I get, I want to give a percentage to first responders, social workers, and medical treatment centers to help with kids who are in trauma. I mean, kids who have been in house fires or kids who are going to foster care. They don't get anything. They get a bag to throw their clothes into, and that's all
Yeah.
they get. I
Yeah.
would like these foster kids to get a buddy to be able to feel safe with.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think that's a great because I know in some states there's like blankets that are given to kids when they're picked up by the police for emergency situations and things like that. But how nice would it be if they were given a buddy?
yeah. Yeah, and Moody comes with their own mode of transportation. It's a backpack. And I also put a coloring book in as well that talks about big feelings. So for a child who's in a traumatic moment, like a house fire, it's good to have something that they can focus on outside of that trauma. So I know a lot of first responder groups, they give like teddy bears to
Yeah.
kids who are in trauma. And I would like Moody to be able to be there for those kids. And again, medical treatment centers, there are kids who are going through cancer treatments that are so painful and traumatic. To have them at, hospitals to give to these kids is very important to me.
Yeah. Do you have an online store in case there's a parent out there that has an autistic kid that's like, hey, let me try Moody?
Yes, yes. So it's mymoodymonster.com. And right now you can pre-order your Moody. Once I am finished with the fundraiser, which should be any like week now, I'll be able to do the order. And as soon as they come into me, they will go straight out to the parents, therapists, teachers, whoever want them in their life. And you can also donate a Moody. You can pre-order a donation for a Moody as well.
Oh, that's so cool. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. So do you think that you might um go into the kids space with some of your therapies and stuff? Is that something that you might be interested in doing later on?
Yes. So I would love to be able to build like a Calm app for kids with the DBT skills that they can use. Because, Moody may not be with them at one point, but if something should happen that triggers them, their parents can give them the phone and pull up the Moody app. And, how are you feeling? Click on this, and here are the coping skills that let's try this to see if you feel better. So I'd love that. And eventually I'm hoping the end all be all would be to have a Make a Monster where kids can pick exactly how they want their Moody to look.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, I can't wait to see this grow and grow because
Yeah,
this is awesome.
thank you.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts for listeners?
Yes, yes. I always like to leave people with healing is not linear. It's a roller coaster ride. And when you're in your healing journey, you have to give yourself, grace. Give yourself that grace to understand that there are going to be difficult days and easier days, and you deserve to be able to help yourself in those moments, to give yourself what you need. If you need to crawl under the blankets, go right ahead. If that's going to help you through that day, through that moment, through that situation that you're feeling so overwhelmed with and triggered by, give yourself the grace and give yourself that self-love that we were talking about.
Yeah, 100%. Do you think you're going to write a book?
I would love to write a book. I actually have a friend who's a publisher, and she's like, "You have a story in you."
You
So,
do. You do.
yeah,
And you could go so many different ways. You could even, make it a therapeutic book talking about how to get, and you could do adults and kids alike and just share your story. Yeah, I would love to stay in touch, especially if you decide to do a book. I'd like to have you back on if that
yeah.
ends up in the works, but definitely want to keep following you and Moody.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This was fantastic. I
Yes.
loved our conversation.
Me too. And I feel like we don't hear enough about things like complex PTSD, and we don't give enough attention to it. We go, oh, it's just another, word, but it really is how people are feeling and experiencing life. And so for you to go above and beyond and create tools for people like me who's healing from it, or my kids trying to heal from generational trauma, it makes me feel like the world's really going to turn into a better place thanks to people like you.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
love what I do.
and I'm so glad you do. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.